Good morning, dear friends. Today is the 11th of Tishrei. It is Matzah Yom Kippur. I just hit mute all. It's Matzah Yom Kippur. It is the 17th of September, and we're learning Gemara, as just mentioned. 4 days between Rosh Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Those that say it corresponds to the 4 letters of Hashem's name. Holy times to take the momentum from Yom Kippur, and we channel it into joyous energy over Sukkot. We're studying, by the way, the Gemara, the entire Talmud, 1 page, 1 line at a time. Presently, studying Maseches Shabbos. Today, we're properly starting with Hashem's help, chapter 8, Perek Shmini, Perek Hamoitzi Yayin, and that is where we're at. This is a fairly short Perek. It's got 5 blots, so we're talking about 10 pages, 10 single-sided pages, and we're continuing our conversation about the measurements, the shiur of what is considered carrying for the purposes of Shabbos. And just to mention that in Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, as well as in general machshava, there is a continuous connection between the different Yom Tovim that we're observing, Rosh Hashanah, then Yom Kippur, then Sukkot and Simchas Torah. So of course, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is the more obvious. It's a unit of time where we're atoning and repairing and fixing things up. It's connected to the calculation of when Moshe Rabbeinu went on the mountain, right? He comes down for the third time with his Luchei Shniyos, the second tablet on Yom Kippur. And in Machshava, though, it's a process of starting a new year. And so we start off with Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of the year, and it's when Hashem creates the plan for the year. Once we're fully inspired and we realize that it's going to be a great new year, so then we want to repair the damage that may have been carried over from last year, and that's what that starts to mean Teshuvah and Yom Kippur are. But now that we're bringing down this shefa, this energy, and we're reconnecting to Hashem, so we go into the sukkah, which is an embrace, right? The sukkah has 2.5 or 3 or 4 walls, and it's like an embrace of Hashem, and we're fully in holy space, mitzvah space. Additionally, it says that schach, I don't remember the gematria exactly now, but schach is associated with ketoris, the anan haktoris. And the idea is that the great intense holiness that the Kohen Gadol would channel and reflect and represent in the ketoris on Yom Kippur, that same kedusha is found in the schach, in the holy schach, which is the mitzvah of the sukkah. And so Kabbalistically, there's this continuing connection and deepening connection. Once we've got through the tumultuous part of the relationship, then we can go into the uninhibited part of the relationship. Yeah, so it's brought that it's like a Rosh Hashanah is like a wedding, Yom Kippur is like also the, and then Sukkot is like going into the chuppah, or in the Sephardic tradition, the marriage happens in the privacy of in halacha as well. So it's like the chas and kal are moving in. It's the Jewish people are moving in with Hashem kaviyachol into the sukkah. So anyways, all that's a long way to say we're in holy times and special times, and there's no better time to be learning Gemara and to be starting a new Perek. And so thank you to everyone who may be hung over from Yom Kippur and the aftermath and the break fast and whatever, and yet everybody's here to learn Gemara. What a special tribute to our outstanding members of the Chabura, the Gemara Chabura, for the virtual Gemara Chabura. So here we are, new Perek, Perek Hamoitzi Yayin. We took a peek at the Mishnah, but let's start again. I want to remind you, there was some background noise, so I hit mute all, but of course, this is not about me, so please unmute, and we love to hear your thoughts, wisdom, insight throughout this studying session. Here we go. Hamoitzi Yayin. So now that we spoke in the last Mishnah about the Klal Gadol, about carrying, and it has to be certain amounts that are chashiv to a person in the right volume, let's give some specifics, and it warrants a new perek, which is going to go through the specifics. Hamoitzi Yayin, if a person is carrying wine. Now, eventually we'll have to figure out how he's carrying it and what happened to the vessel that's being carried in, but let's put that out of our mind for now. Now we're going to talk about how much wine is being carried. So if you carry wine, the amount of wine that is a problem is kidei mizigas hakois, the amount of concentrated wine that will make a cup work. That's the amount of wine you can't carry. As the Gemara is going to discuss, In ancient times, the wine was very, very strong and concentrated, and people did not drink wine plainly. They would have to add water so it had the right proportions and the right density and the right thickness and the right taste. And, I don't know if that's a thing today in wine drinking, but it seems like ancient wines were very heavy and very thick and needed water to create the proper consistency. So how much wine can you carry? The amount of wine, Rashi, the amount of raw, undiluted, unmanipulated wine, to add water as is appropriate, and to pour the wine, to mix the wine and the water. The Gemara is going to talk about what are the measurements and which kind of cup, etc., etc. But that's the first issue that we're going to discuss in the Mishnah and then in the Gemara, which is the carrying of wine and how much is a problem. Now, there are other liquids too, chalav. So how much chalav are you not allowed to carry on Shabbos? Kidei gimiya. So this is enough milk that is swallowed in a gulp. The Gemara will discuss that as well. Kidei gimiya. Dr. Stamler, in modern Hebrew, gimiya, is that a word?
It is a word. I would correspond it to a shluk.
A gulp.
In Yiddish.
A gulp.
Yeah, well, I was just kidding. I was translating into Yiddish.
They gimiya. All right, so that's how much milk you can carry. One sipful. Devash, how much honey? And so what is the unit of honey for consumption? How much honey does one consume? So the Mishnah tells us it's actually not about consumption here. Shalom, you want to take a peek? There's somebody going around the side. I don't know if it's it's probably the workers. Maybe we should just meet them. Oh, they're working on something? Okay.
They're taking
the generator?
the generator.
Okay, good. Do me a favor, is Alon around? I need to ask him a question about the AC units. You see if he's around. Dvash, honey. It's the amount of wine, honey that is placed on a kosis. Rashi. The backs of horses and camels develop sores. Machmas hamasois, because they are forced to carry heavy weights. And what I imagine is happening is, or heavy burdens. And because there's some movement, it must irritate the skin of these animals. We're just going to open for just a moment. Okay. Bluntness. Okay, that doesn't really help us much, but suffice it to say, the backs of the animals have irritation. And this is what the Gemara says. Honey is used to treat these sores. Interestingly enough, Rashi says my rabbis have a different interpretation, that it talks about a regular wound, a regular irritation on a person's hand or feet. So that's what the honey is good for, and that's the amount of honey they not only carry, the amount of honey that will be desirable. So you can imagine they have these little honey packets that was used to treat livestock, and so the amount that goes into the little honey packet that you could pick up at the vet, that's the amount of honey you're not allowed to carry. Alon is here?
Yeah.
Can you call him here for a second? What's he doing? Oh, okay, good. Can you do me a favor?
Sure.
Snap a picture with my phone.
Yeah.
Okay, so then hold on.
Tom to come in.
Okay.
And he's taking some pictures of the AC unit.
Okay. So ask Alon if he can call Shana to find out about the ACs. All right, sorry about that. Shemen, honey, how much? I'm sorry. Shemen, oil. How much oil is a problem to carry? And if it's a problem to carry, it means that it is a an amount that brings value, that's needed. The amount of oil that we use to smear a small limb. Now, here is the thing. Today, we don't really, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, we have some pharmacists on the call. Actually, Beryl, I think today you're a lone pharmacist, so you have to help us out. But it seems like once upon a time, people didn't have all these fancy skin moisturizers. And so oil is what was used to keep the skin fresh and young. Now, today, I know some people desire to remove oil from their skin, but apparently once upon a time, halavai, there would be oil. And so oil was used to smear. And we read about it in brachas, right? That part of the meal. After the meal, they would wash their hands with oil. And so, shemen, kedei losuch, aver kata, the amount of oil that's needed for a small limb. Again, all these things will be elaborated in the Gemara Be'ez Hashem. Mayim, how much water is the minimum amount of water that you're not allowed to carry? Or I should say that if one carries, they have desecrated the biblical prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. The amount of water, Rashi says, shenoisnim al ha'ayin, amount of water that is placed to treat the eye.
That's not much. That would be just a little splash.
Yeah, let's look at our Steinsaltz here for a moment. So here, water, the equivalent that is used to rub on an eye bandage. So Rashi, I didn't pick that up, but apparently, at least Rabbi Steinsaltz and others explain that if a person put a keeler, which apparently was some kind of bandage, so they put a little water. What's the point of the water? I don't know.
No, we use compresses on the
Oh,
eye.
it's here's what it is. It's a compress, but it needs water to soften so that it can mold to the eye. And so that amount of water is the amount of water that is prohibited to carry, because that's the smallest amount of water that's functional, of value. So these are some specific fluids that have specific value beyond drinking, smaller or lesser amounts than drinking. Ushar kol mashkim b'revius, but a standard liquid, the amount is a revius, a quarter of a log, as we discussed on Sunday, right? Was it Sunday? No, hold on. My time is all. On Tuesday. On Tuesday, Mark helped us figure out how much a revius is. I just want to point out that this kedei gemia, this gulp, is apparently less than a revius. So the chalav is a little less, it's just a swallow. We'll maybe see later why milk would be different than other things. Dvash, because it's a remedy. Oil, because it's used to treat one's skin. Water.
The gulp, half a mouth is considered half a mouthful or a full mouthful?
I'm not sure yet. Let's see the Gemara, but for now we'll leave it. The Gemara is going to discuss a little bit. Water can be used to activate your eye compress or bandage, and everything else revius. Rebero.
It's just a little curious for me. Before we look at the Gemara, we have all these measurements, and yet none of them are kazayit. And we have kazayit as a measurement in so many places.
So let me jump in. First of all, that's a good point. We're going to discuss very, very soon, very much about a kazayis. But if I wouldn't know the Gemara coming down, I tell you what is a kazayis? A kazayis is a solid measure. And here we're talking about the fluid measurements. However, you are correct, because some of these items can dry out, and the Gemara is going to discuss, is there a solid equivalent if, let's say, the wine is just the, how do you call it? Just the wine hardens, because we're talking about very concentrated wine, so then is there a different measurement? So that's a good question. But we're talking here primarily about fluids, liquids, and so the liquid measurements are different. And again, just to remind us that the measurements, the shiurim that we're using, are not the scientific official measurements. Rather, we're describing them as their function, as they are used in a functional sense. We had the same question or the same discussion in the previous Mishnah. Why did we talk about the amount of feet for an animal? Why don't we just say the measure? And we said it's to come to teach us that those measurements are strongly associated with their function at the smallest level, or how you would use it with the least amount. So I think that same idea applies to our Mishnah. So that would be another reason why we don't hear of a kizayis. And as long as there's a specific function, we don't give the measurement, we say its use. But then when it comes to shar mashke and all other liquids, the standard is revius. A revius today is a standalone measurement, but what a revius, right? We'll talk about a revius. What a revius really is, or what's the origin of the word revius? It's a quarter of a log.
We're calling this the Gregarious is the mouthful that we're talking about?
Again,
Gregarious?
that was in solids. Let's forget about that for a moment.
Okay. 'Cause here, in the app, they only give, they don't distinguish between solids and liquid. They have them all mixed together.
I'm sorry?
This new app I have for the measurements, it has the Gregarious and it has the Kazayas and the Kabetza and the Revis, all, they call it volume. They don't say liquid or solid.
Interesting. Okay.
I guess it's still the same measure. If it's volume, it's volume. Whether it's
Possibly.
liquid or-
Let's see. So, mashkin, revius. What is a revius? Mark here. Now get out your calendar, your calculator. Beitza umechsa.
Revis is half a Betza.
A beitza and a half. No, a beitza and a half is a quarter of a log. So a log would be 6.
So it's 86 milliliters.
Hold on. So
Revius.
hold on. First, I'm sorry. For some reason, my headphone isn't working, so I'm having a little bit harder time hearing. So pardon me.
It's 86 according to this, 86 milliliters is a Revis. That's
Is
about
Revis.
3 ounces.
But 3 ounces or so. But back up for a moment. If a
That's- yeah, but we
revius
know-
is
1.42 for Friday night.
hold on.
Revius.
If a revius is an egg and a half,
No, Revis is half an egg. Oh, no, egg and a half. I'm sorry.
an egg and a half is a revius. So then a log is going to be 6 eggs, correct?
No, yeah, a lug is a quarter. Yeah, a leg is a quarter of a Revis, so it's 6 eggs. Yeah, so convert from bait to yeah. Let's do it the other way around. A lug. Let's start with a lug. It's actually pretty handy little app here. Look, your lug is 6 baits, so yeah, 6 baits to 4 Revis and a quarter of a cob.
You want to see if you want to
12 is 18.
maybe just try a little bit. I'm
It's an app. It's called iPruta. It's actually kind of handy.
Shkoyach, Mark. So stay on standby because we're going to keep on needing your assistance here. Don't lose the app. So regular fluids, revius. B'chol ha'shoifchin, Rashi, mayim seruchim, icky water. Also revius. Now here's the question: who has any use for foul water? And so that's such a good question. Rashi says, "Don't worry, we're going to discuss this." What
Probably
use?
wash your, I could still wash your feet with it. Maybe.
Maybe. So this is the first opinion of our Mishnah. Liquids, we always go to the smallest measure or volume that has function or desirability. What's the smallest amount that you'll actually put to use? And again, today you'd have yeshiva bachrim selling little honey packets for your animals' wounds because it says in the Mishnah. In those days, they probably didn't have that. But why is a person carrying honey, or how much honey is a person carrying? The amount that would actually be of value. And everything else that doesn't have these specific measurements, it would be a revius. Rabbi Shimon is going to disagree. And if you recall, Rabbi Shimon was actually, I believe Rabbi Shimon was quoted in our previous Mishnah. So let's just take a look at Rabbi Shimon's different opinion. Rabbi Shimon says no. Kulan b'revius. In truth, every liquid, honey, oil, water, wine, it's all a revius. The measurements that are mentioned by our Mishnah, they're real. They exist. But they only exist to a person who actually uses them at these amounts and actually stores them at these amounts. So let's talk about today. Once upon a time, maybe many people had donkeys or camels or horses. Well, then such individuals would probably have a stockpile of honey to treat their wounds. But what about urban folks like us? Well, in those days, probably urban folks also had animals. Maybe they had animals. But what about people like us who live in a modern era where Baruch Hashem, most of us don't have to get around using animals. And so therefore we aren't treating our our horses in such a manner? And what about today where we don't use oil to moisturize or to treat our skin? And maybe we don't use water to moisten the salve that goes on our eye. You go to Bascom Palmer if you have any eye concerns, or you can go to your local eye doctor if it's a little more mild. So then, according to Rabbi Shimon, we would reject these measurements, and the volume is revius. These measurements are only for people that actually practice and use these fluids with these measurements. Rashi. So here's what I believe Rabbi Shimon is saying. The fact that these measurements exist, yes, that is part of our tradition. It's legit. But it's only for people that actually use it, not for everyone. Rashi. Shi'urim Sheva Mishnah, the measurements that our Mishnah presents only apply lematzni ehem levat. The chazer hamatzniya v'itziyu, and a person who's actually storing honey at these measurements or oil at these measurements, and then he went and carried it out, chayiv, he's chayiv. Amal shar kol adam shayitziyu. But if a regular person happens to have a little bit of honey in their pocket, or even if they carried honey inadvertently from their friend, einay chayiv, they are not chayiv. They are not liable for having carried, because to them what they carried was an insignificant little dab of honey with no value. According to Rabbi Shimon, it would seem that he himself believes that even the matzniya, even the person that stores it, would only be chayiv at these amounts. But such a person, they have a smaller measure. But if they'd even have less honey than the amount of honey that would be contributed to healing the horse, according to Rabbi Shimon, even then he'd be off the hook. And this is something that we read earlier. This is the Gemara earlier. So if you want to remind ourselves, we don't have to turn back. We'll read Rashi here. Rabbi Shimon doesn't believe that it's all about the standard amount. He allows for the fact that there are exceptions for people that value these fluids or these items at a smaller amount. And so Rabbi Shimon is strongly disagreeing with the Mishnah. The Mishnah seems to be indicating that everybody, all of society, depends on what the average smallest amount is. And Rabbi Shimon says no. For everyone, it's a revius, unless you have these lesser uses. That is the Mishnah, and that is Rashi teaching us the Mishnah. Now, okay, the truth is, I'm sure we have a lot of comments and questions, but I just want to note that most likely much of our questions and comments will be addressed in the Gemara, or will be better served in the Gemara. But yet, if there are any burning comments or questions, please, before we go into the Gemara, feel free to chime in here.
No, Rabbi, the obvious open the window is somebody who's in that business or whatever, but there's people part-time. Let's say somebody only has a donkey or a horse as a pet, but he still once in a while needs to use honey. Maybe yes, maybe no. So
I think if he has it in his store, if he stored it, even if it's part-time, it would appear, but it's a good question. It's a good question. Let's see if there's some discussion on that. Let me just read, to close out the Mishnah, let me read Rabbi Steinsaltz's analysis of the comment of Rabbi Shimon. Again, he says all measures were only stated for those who store them. One indicates that he considers these liquids significant by storing them. The fact that he has it in a storage, that's his statement to himself and to everyone else that it's actually valuable. One is only liable for carrying out an object that is significant to him. Others, for whom these measures are insignificant, are not liable for carrying them. So this is what Rashi said, but just in clear words. So basically, your actions speak loud, and your actions can count to designate something as chashuv to you, because it shows us what you really value. Here comes the Mishnah, and here comes the Gemara's analysis. Before we start, Dr. Hammer, I want to tell you. So I just got a phone call from someone from Potomac, and he's going to be here for a few days in Sukkot. So I said, "Oh, you must know do you know our friends, the Nadels?" He said, "Oh, really? I was in Shul, and the Chazan actually led Yisker." So regards from the Mechutin.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you.
Tana. So now let's see the Tosefta's elaboration to help us make sense of the Mishnah. Kidei mezigas kais yafa. What does it mean, meziga? Kidei mezigas kais yafa, to prepare to make a chashiva cup. Rashi, Tana, Bito Sefta. So Rashi here is giving us an address to look up this citation in the Tosefta. Hamotzi Yainke de Mezigas Kois Yafa, Pirish, Lekois de Masnis. And this Tosefta, which is like a appendix, there were teachings in the Mishnaic era that didn't make it into the Mishnah, but they end up providing us great insight into the intent of the Mishnah. Because as we know, the Mishnah was shorthand. It was meant for the folks to memorize and to know the halachas, but within the Mishnah, there were commentary and codes, and so the Gemara is going to decipher it by telling us that the Tosefta says, what is a kais? Kais yafa. But now we have a problem. What is a nice cup? Is it a silver kiddush cup? Let's see. My kais yafa. So the Gemara asks, what is the definition of a kais yafa? Kais shel bracha, the type of cup that we make a bracha over. And what kind of cup is that? Rashi, birchas hamazon, the kind of cup with all of the criteria of a cup that's used by benching. And the Chazal insist that it be a quality cup, well done. Itor, fadacha, shtifa, the cup needs to be cleaned and washed out, and it needs to have fresh, concentrated wine with water, and it needs to be full. So we don't understand it's a kais yafa. Does that give us any halachic measurements?
But Rabbi, our issue is not how the cup is designed. Our issue is how much the cup holds.
Basically, no. Here's the Gemara's question. There are presumably different metrics or ways that a person might how much water to wine. And if you have someone in your house and you're not really interested in honoring them, but you need to serve a cup. Okay, here's a cup. You might not be so generous. You might be a little bit more. Sorry. So here we're talking about a proper Victorian cup. It has to be where you're proper and chashuv and polite. And so that is the story. Let's see if any of the commentators give us any more insight here. Not yet. Hold on. We'll see. The Gemara is not done yet, but okay, let's see the Gemara now, because we know a Kashal Bracha, but now we need to know what's the deal. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Baravua. So Rav Nachman's quoting Rabbi Baravua. What is a Kashal Bracha? Here is the criteria. Kashal Bracha, the measurement of wine per water in a Kashal Bracha, in this chashuv, a cup we're using to honor benching. Sorech sheyehei boy roiva revius. There needs to be a quarter of a revius. So that when you pour water into your concentrated wine, you end up with a revius. So Mark, help us out here for a moment. So if a revius is 1.5 eggs, so how much is a roiva revius?
Wait, a rova would be a more than a revius, or?
No, it's a quarter of a revius.
Oh, reva revius.
Yeah.
What's the app? Get back to it. I guess I try to start converting. Okay, revius. The revius is one. Oh well, that would be you want that in milliliters, ounces, or a relationship to other units?
I'm sorry.
Ounces.
Give us ounces.
So
it's probably less than an ounce, right?
Yeah, about 3/4 of an ounce. Yeah.
If a revius is 3 or 4 ounces,
Then it'd be about
under 4 ounces. So then we're talking about an ounce or less. We're talking about a pretty small amount of liquid.
Look at a shot glass. It's only 1 ounce or 2 ounces.
Hang on, I'm sorry. Let me try this again. Hold on. I'm sorry. Just we're. Let's see. They work now.
Shot glasses are usually only 1 ounce. Those little tiny, the ones we do the l'chaim in. I think they're only an ounce. So an ounce is a lot. An ounce of liquid is a lot more than you think.
Hold on. An ounce of liquid.
The little, I think the little cups we do for l'chaim are only an ounce. 1 ounce.
No, they're more than an ounce.
Maybe they're 2.
Probably 2 ounces.
Kiddush cup's about 4 or 5 ounces. The typical Kiddush cup, maybe 6.
Hmm.
So, a lot smaller than that.
Give me another second. I just want.
No, an ounce of liquid, I was surprised how much it was. You expect it to be like an insignificant amount, but there's actually some substance to it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
those little shot glasses are probably about an ounce.
Probably
Yeah.
more. I think
Oh yeah,
more.
probably more. My sense, but again, I defer to Mark with all matters of measurements.
It depends, I guess it depends on the shot glass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends
But
on
they
the
have-
jewel. The jewel.
Listen, you have some Jews that when it comes to l'chaim, they follow the Chazon Ish measurements, which are more are larger volume, and then when it comes to
An ounce is 5 teaspoons.
Five
That
teaspoons.
see, makes it easier.
that's not too shabby.
An ounce is 4, actually 6 teaspoons. It's 4 tablespoons. No, 2 tablespoons. Tablespoon is half an ounce, and 3
2 tablespoons or 4 teaspoons?
3 teaspoons in a
Is
tablespoon.
your name on here?
No,
There's 6
Do me a
teaspoons in
favor,
it.
just for the records, if you could. Thank you so much. So there we have it. Wine, Reva Revius. So it's a quarter of a log, which is the amount of wine of ancient wine, which was very strong. And
No, do you know what the ratio was? They diluted that wine. It was like 3 to 1 or something, or 4 to 1.
no, here it's
Water.
4 to 1, or it's 1. No, it's 1 and 3, but it's 1
Wine,
quarter.
Water.
It's 1 part
Yeah.
wine, 3 parts water.
How much wine concentrate to make a cup of wine?
1
Or do you use
quarter.
1 quarter, okay. So quarter revis would be enough to make it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's how we
Again,
that's how we got it.
this doesn't work today because today our wine is already it's much less. I'm not a maven in wines. I never really developed that space. But I do know that even in the wines that are available on the market, certain types of wine are heavier and are more syrupy. So for example, you talk about the upstate New York Concord wine, Manischewitz or whatever, is going to be a little more syrupy, though probably a lower alcohol content than some of the other, fine wines. But I know that a port wine, for example, seems to be a thicker, a heavier kind of wine than other. Yes, Roberto.
Rabbi, it's a real issue in Quebec. Alan will confirm probably. Grocery stores are only allowed to sell wine that's bottled here in Quebec. So
Mhm.
they bring in concentrate for some. And I'm just wondering, Alan, do they have a kosher one?
Kosher what?
The wine in the grocery, all the grocery wines are bottled in Quebec. Otherwise, they can't sell them in the grocery stores.
I don't buy them in the grocery stores.
In the super, no, I know, but would
Probably
be an
don't have
issue.
kosher.
I buy better stuff than that.
I thought that in Canada, all alcohol is government controlled and
Yeah,
special
but it's
government
by
stored.
province, by province, not federal.
We have a Jew that comes to our show, and I believe they're very involved in Ontario's.
They have
Mash-
good vineyards in
Mashkal.
Niagara.
Well, no, I don't know if they are producing the wine. I think they have a license to.
I will ask my contact at the VAD next time I speak to him.
I don't know. I have to find out if it's kosher wine. But anyways, all right. So this is wine. So now we understand that it was highly concentrated and well diluted. And yet, even at this level, it seems like the wines back then may have been. Well, actually, I don't know about that. We read about how many cups they would drink. A cup and a cup, right? There's potential to drink a lot of cups of wine. But anyways, here we have it. This is the formula. 1 quarter was wine. And so if you're carrying a quarter of a revius, which is a quarter of a leg, which is, Reb Mark told us, around an ounce or so, give or take, and we're talking about a few tablespoons, not that much. I'm sorry?
Oh, so 3/4, let's say it's 3/4 of an ounce, it would be, let's see, that would be 1.5 tablespoons, or
Okay.
if we want to say between 3/4 and a quarter, we could say that would be the 5 teaspoons.
All right,
Which is actually what we wanted, which would be 4/6, I guess, not 4/6, 5/6.
Okay. So now the question is there a standard wine? Are there different kinds of wines? So let's take a look at the Gemara. Amar Rava. And by the way, we're now turning to page 77, 77A. Amar Rava, af anan nami tanena. In truth, there is a Mishnah which makes a similar indication. How does a Mishnah make a similar indication. Because it says, Hamoitzi yayin kidei mizigas kois. Because our Mishnah says, Hamoitzi yayin, when you carry wine, it's the amount that is moizik, that you pour into a cup, the amount of wine with water. The Tani Allah, and there's a teaching regarding the Mishnah that says, kidei mizigas kois yafa, it has to be a nice cup. The Tani Seif. And then the end of the Mishnah says, Ushar kol hamashkim b'revius. All other liquids have to be revius. So our Mishnah, by saying that the amount of wine that you carry is kedem zigas kais, and we understand that a full cup is revius, we can infer that we're talking about a quarter of.
They're saying this one, because it's concentrated, whatever's enough to make a release is the maximum amount you can carry.
Yeah, the amount of wine that presents a revius of drinkable wine. Yes, Dr. Hammer.
When does wine cease being wine? The question is, if you make a spritz, seltzer, and a bit, just a very little amount of wine, and you're going to make a bracha, at what point is it Borei Pri HaGefen?
That's a very good question. You know what? It's discussed in the laws of Birchas Hanenin, but I'm not fresh on it, but it's a very good question. In other words, Doctor, what you're asking is, we understand that wine may be diluted to some degree. In the Mishnaic times, it was a quarter of a revius. But at a certain point, less than that, Doctor, if I understand this, what you're saying, you can infer from here, and at a certain point, less than that, it's not even considered wine.
Right, that's my question.
Yeah, and that's it. That is actually a good question halachically, because you could sometimes put, like the doctor said, a little spritz, a little bit of a little wine, gives a little pigment, a little flavor, but it's not, you wouldn't consider wine. So that's a good question, and certainly that question is validated by our Gemara, which is telling us that even a little bit of wine is considered a full cup of wine, because it's the wine that sustains the revius, and that's essentially the case that Rava is saying. Rava is saying our Mishnah really infers. So it's not just that we have a Tosefta that tells us. No, our Mishnah, if you read carefully between the lines, it's clear that the amount of wine that sustains the revius is going to be a quarter revius. Rava l'tamei. Now, why does Rava say that the Mishnah refers to it? Why doesn't he say that we need additional commentary? Because Rava had a rule. Amar Rava taught, Kol chamra dilo dari al chad plus maya, any wine that isn't diluted by 3 parts water, lav chamrahu, this is not considered wine. So here, Rava is actually saying the opposite, Doctor. You're saying that there's a certain point where there's so little wine that it's not considered wine. But Rava also says a proper cup of wine, a cup of wine, a l'chaim has to have certain definitions. And wine that doesn't have enough water, that's syrup. That's not wine. So being that Rava says you always need to have 3 parts water, 1 part wine. So when the Mishnah says the amount of wine needed for a cup, and we know that a standard cup is revius, then obviously we're talking about a quarter of revius. Not everybody sees it this way, but based on Rava's opinion, this is an appropriate way to read it. Let's see Rashi for a moment. Tanena. What does Tanena mean? So Rashi explains to us what we mean. Mi masnisin nami sham inon. Our Mishnah itself teaches us the same as was said over here. Dizehu shiura, that this is the measurement of wine. The tani b'shar mashkin revius, being that all liquids you need to have a revius. Shamina minei the ein haitzah b'mashke haroy l'shtia paches mervius. We understand that fluids that are drunk need to have a revius. Hilkach al korcha. We must say. We said that the wine needs to be the amount that affects, that validates a kashal bracha. We're talking about the amount of wine that activates a revius of drinking. And therefore, it's going to be a quarter revius. Rashi right now is literally giving us a shiur on how to read the Gemara. Because when you apply 3 parts water, which is the way of proper wine drinking, Yamaid al revius, now you will end up with a revius. So until this point, Rashi is literally explaining to us how to learn the Gemara. Rashi is giving us a blot shiur. Then Rashi goes on. I think we're going to. Then Rashi says there are other ways of interpreting the Gemara that are incorrect, but the appropriate way of learning the Gemara according to Rashi is this, what we just read, which is how we read our Gemara.
So Rabbi,
Yes.
how come they came to decide that you can make a bracha over grape juice, which is not even wine? I mean, it's grapes, but it's not wine.
I don't really understand the question.
Why if we make a bori priya gofen on wine, why do we make the same bracha on grape juice, which is not even wine? I mean, it's grapes, it's part of the wine, but it's not wine.
So that's a good question. Probably the elaboration on this belongs in the discussion of brachas, but suffice it to say that the bracha on wine, I'm sorry, we say the bracha on wine is bori priya gofen, but really the bracha on grape on juice that comes from grapes, fermented and not, is bori priya gofen. So
Right.
the better question would be, why don't we say bori priya gofen on
Wine.
actual grapes? And the answer is that a grape, its real value is actually grape juice and wine. Just like olives were seen once upon a time as their primary contribution to society is oil. Today we love eating a good olive, but once upon a time. So with grapes, we make eights on grapes, we make ala eights, but chashuv bracha is only for wine in its best form. And grape in its best form is when it's turned into juice, typically fermented. I will add though, although the bracha is the same, and the question you're asking has some space, there is there's a preference, although not always possible. There is a preference to make kiddush and to do matters of kosher bracha to be on wine over grape juice. But for health reasons, or some people that struggle with alcoholism, so then a person that struggles with that, there should be no shame. They should drink grape juice, and if even grape juice is a problem, they have to consider that too. But there is a preference to using wine over grape juice for that very reason. Wine is really the really perfected and preferred method of grapes.
And I think, Rabbi, there's a preference for red wine over white wine in certain situations, particularly.
Yes. I will add, just because you brought up, there's an interesting story that maybe you've heard. There was a person that had some kind of degenerative eye condition. I don't remember his name, but he's known. It's like someone that's out there to this day. And he asked, I believe he visited the Lubavitch Rebbe, I believe it was for $1, and the Rebbe would give $1 for the bracha. And he told the Rebbe he needs a bracha for his eyes. And the Rebbe told him he should be very careful to make kiddush and havdalah on wine. Actually, I know what it is. It's the father of, it'll come to me. And he started making kiddush on wine. And his condition, which was a degenerative condition, miraculously reversed, and his eyesight, I believe it was improved. And it's brought in the Gemara that there's a connection between Ma'orei Naim, the eyesight, and Kiddush and Havdalah. And that's why actually when you make the bracha bori priya gofen, the minhag is to look at the cup, look into the cup of wine. And so as a segula, listen, the Rebbe was a tzaddik, and the Rebbe, could tell a person a custom segula, and so that person should listen. But the point is that there was an association between the Kiddush and Havdalah and eyesight, and to do it in the preferred manner, which is with wine. And I have to confess, I try to make Havdalah on wine, but sometimes there is no wine or whatever, and so there are alternatives.
From Scotland.
I'm sorry?
I said from Scotland.
No. Actually, that's not where I was going. Believe it or not, I've never made Havdalah from Scotland, a Scottish drink. Maybe that surprises you, but no. A kiddush might have happened once or twice, but not Havdalah. All right, Amar Abaya. Abaya rejects Rava's read on the Mishnah. So again, what did Rava say? Rava said, read our Mishnah carefully and read between the lines, and it's obvious that the amount the Mishnah is talking about is a quarter of Revius. I have two problems, two challenges to this assertion. First of all, there's another Mishnah that talks about wine being diluted in two parts. And so that itself is a problem. That is a problem. I'm sorry. Wine of the Sharon is diluted differently, 2 parts water, 1 part wine, which essentially means that the wine is more dominant or the wine is weaker, so therefore it needs less dilution, right? Because 1/3 is more than 1/4. V'oid, mayim, v'kad, umitztarfin. How should we know? Proper wine is wine with water. So am I supposed to assume without an explicit teaching that the water is in the water bucket? The wine is in your hand in a little flask or whatever. Am I supposed to automatically assume they connect? No. It needs to be taught in the Mishnah. So Abaye says, number one, not all wines are diluted, 3 parts water. Number 2, without an explicit teaching, this wine is useless because the wine that's undiluted is not drinkable. So only a Mishnah is going to teach us that it needs to be wine, or even the wine without its water is still considered a problem. So Abaye says, Rava, with all due respect, we need the additional teaching from the Tosefta to know that you cannot carry. This is the amount of wine that you can carry, 1/4 of a lug. And then Rava disagrees. I'm going to push back. Rava says, no. All wines are 3 parts water, 1 part wine. There's one wine that has to be called out because it's only 2 parts water. So many times the exception proves the rule. Again, Yain hashironi is the exception. It's unique. Why? The Rafi, it's not as strong, and therefore, if you dilute it with a common amount, it'll be too diluted. Inami, but there's an alternative rejection to this teaching. Hasam mishum chazusa. There's a Mishnah in Gemara Nida, which is talking about different colors and different shades of red. And so there they say Sharon wine with 2 parts water, that is a certain shade of red. But for consumption, it needs to be better than that. Udika Amris, and as to your challenge, that how should we know that wine that's undiluted is possible? The water is still in the water bucket. Mayim bekadum etztarfin. Le'inyan Shabbos midi dechashavina. When it comes to Shabbos, our only question is this measurement chashuv? Is it significant? Is it desirable? The hanami chashuv, and for the purposes of wine, you need your little wine packet to prepare your cup. And therefore, usually, of course, how should I know that when it's unmixed, it's still valuable? But here we're not talking about making a bracha. We're not talking about drinking it. We're talking about how much wine you'd want to preserve because you're going to have a good cup of wine. And so Rava supports his position that it's obvious from the Mishnah that 1/4 of a revius of wine is the amount that you cannot carry. And Abaye and Rava are not disagreeing in the facts of the case. They're just disagreeing on if we need to have additional citations, additional teachings to come to this conclusion. So Abaye and Rava are essentially disagreeing on how to read into the Mishnah. And I believe we're going to stop over here. So we have started our first round, our first conversation in the Gemara in the new chapter on the question of how much wine is a problem to carry on Shabbos. Suffice it to say, we've concluded that it is 1/4 of a revius. But the words our Mishnah uses is kidei mezigas kais yafa, the amount of wine that is needed for a nice cup. And the Gemara explained to us, kidei mezigas kais, the amount that's needed for a cup. The Tosefta adds kais yafa, and what is a kais yafa? That is the kind of wine that you're going to do for ceremonial mitzvah purposes, like benching primarily. And for benching, it needs to be done right, it needs to be done nice. And there's a whole series of conditions that our Mishnah that we studied a while ago tells us to respect the moment. Someone saying something? All right. This concludes the formal part of our Gemara. I want to thank you all for joining. Let me just close to mention that which I failed to mention in the beginning, dedicating learning Lizchos, the Forshtem of Leah Basrita, and the healing of all members of Klal Yisrael, and for a good year, a healthy or a joyous year, full of only good, healthy, and happy news for all of Am Yisrael. Folks, I want to thank you all in your holiest state, fully forgiven and atoned. You choose to come learn Gemara, it's very, very special. And I want to thank you all for participating, contributing, and making sure that this is a insightful and enlightening class. Shalom Ber, Rabbi Shalom Ber. Just going to find out about Chumash. Shalom Ber. All right, assume there's going to be a Chumash class. And have a wonderful day. In 6 minutes.
Good Shabbos.
Agud Shabbos, Agud Yontif,
Oh.
Agud Kvittel. Thank you all.
It's a year.